One thing of all this long CV that really I like and I'm proud of is that Mr. James receives his undergraduate degree from Howard University. And and master degree from Florida Institute of Technology. He has also attended the Harvard School of Business and the Kenan Flagler Business School. He is the member of the Acquisition Professional Committee. Mr. James.
Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you for keeping it short. First of all, thank you for inviting me here to speak, and I am humbled to stand before you, and it is a pleasure to be here back at Howard. You know, there's a warmth, there's a sense of family, there's a sense of just being back home when you come back here. So I actually recall when they were building this building. I actually recall the building that was here before it. They didn't really call it a building, it was kind of Quonset huts. Right. But I recall when this first opened, and it was quite an event for Howard. I just want to talk to you a little bit about, one, what I saw today to the students, right? Very good. I got to tell you, that was excellent. I'll just give you a round of applause here. Okay? You know, just seeing your composure, especially the first group, when I was asking them questions, so that's what I do to my staff when I get on them, right? You know, asking them questions and your ability to just be composed and to speak in front of a group. Right? You'd be amazed at how many people can't do that. Right? That really is an art. And to be able to talk about your field, talk about it confidently, and really just to show that you've thought it out. I want to share with you a couple things that what we do in the Missile Defense Agency and to tell you how it applies. So the group that talked about, where's the young man? Right there, that talked about your project? Yes. So the sensor, a thermal sensor. So let me tell you an application. First I want to tell you what the Missile Defense Agency does. So we provide a strictly defensive ballistic missile defense capability for the United States. So here's what I have, right? So we have about an $8 billion budget. Okay, and we go to Congress and we get to defend our budget. I have 32 interceptors up in Fort Greely, Alaska. I have 6 in Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. And the naval vessels, we have about another 80, right? In case someone decides to launch a ballistic missile toward the United States. We have the ability to detect it anywhere in the world, right? We can detect it via satellite or a land-based radar. Right? We transmit that track via satellite to Colorado Springs, which is where my computer center is. We transmit that back to a couple other places that are classified, and we eventually get it out to the shooter. Right? The shooter calculates a firing solution, so the interceptor is now in space. Right? We fire an interceptor, we track it, and we have an aim point, and we hit it within 3 centimeters of the aim point. In space, traveling at 17,000 miles an hour. Right? No explosive warhead, right? Skin-on-skin contact, and we obliterate it. So that, my friends, really is rocket science. Okay. So one of the things we do, right? So when the sensor gets out in space, the kill vehicle, as we call it, when it gets out in space, right? And we tell it to open his eyes. When it first opens his eyes, it looks to see what's out there, and we tell it what it should see. And so one of the things it uses is what you were working on today, right? It opens his eyes, and it's looking thermally. It has some other sensors to say, what do I see out there, right? And then we're talking to it and says, you might see 3 things. Ignore that one, and I want you to go after that one, right? And it does. Okay. So what you're working on isn't just busy work. It actually has real-world applications. So here's one of the things I found out by being in this business, right? We need engineers. We really need engineers. I've been an engineer all my career. I had one job where I was an HR director, but I'll tell you that over an adult beverage how I got that job. But one of the reasons we need engineers is that one of the things that Howard teaches you is a way of thinking. Right? Not just how to build stuff, right? It teaches you a way of thinking. It teaches you how to solve problems. It teaches you how to walk in when people can't solve things. You walk in there, right? You get to listen, you get to think about it, and you get to come up with a solution. And that we will pay you for. That's why engineers coming out of college actually gets paid more than kind of other disciplines, right? Because we need engineers. Because I haven't seen a time yet, and there's some pretty hard things that we do where the engineers couldn't solve it. It might take time, right? And we have to ask some hard questions. And every now and then we have to close the book. Haven't seen a time yet where we couldn't solve it. Everything I've learned at Howard, I use, including some things that even today I thought I would never use. Right? So one, I'm sure you studied the gravitational constant, right? You thought you'd never use it, right? So we actually use it. Right? So the Earth rate, you know what the Earth rate is? No? The rotation of the Earth? Right? So we actually use it, right? So when we fire a missile, we actually need to know what the Earth rate is. Because depending on where you fire it, right, and what it's going, we actually have to know what the Earth rate is. Because an inertial measurement unit, right, that's tracking the body motion of the missile, right, needs to know what the Earth rate is. And I'm sitting in a meeting, this is in the last couple of years, and I'm like, wow, I haven't heard of Earth rate since I was at Howard. I mean, all manner of things. So one of the jobs that I had, and the job that I have today is pretty important, but probably the most fun job I had. And when I got this job, a guy told me, he said, "This is going to be the most fun job you'll ever have." I was the chief engineer for submarines. So I oversaw the design and construction of nuclear submarines. And yes, I got phone calls every night at 2 o'clock in the morning. I work pretty much every weekend because I work with the operators. So that to be a problem, they call me. Right? And there were some of those. And I will tell you that's kind of how I got famous. There were about 4 questions I got times where there was no answer. There was nothing in the book that described what we saw. And we had to close the book, and we actually had to use engineering principles to figure it out. And we figured it out, and we were right. I can't tell you how cool of a feeling that is when you do that. When you actually have to shut the book, there's nobody there to guide you. There's nobody you can go ask because nobody's seen it before. And we had to figure it out. And we did. I want to tell you a couple of clues about this business in engineering. As I told a young lady today, so one of the things I'll tell you, when you get into the workforce, you're going to need a mentor. And here's why you're going to need a mentor. So in the workplace, there are jobs that the organization values more than others. So you students, I want you to write this down. I want you to remember this, right? There are jobs that the organization values more than others. And it's actually not written down anyplace. So how do you know which jobs those are? This is a trick question, right? How do you know which jobs those are? Somebody has to tell you. Right? And typically, I'll tell you, especially for African American males, right? What the organization typically ends up doing, right? You get one of those jobs that needs to be done, but it's not one of the jobs that the organization really values. It's a job that needs to be done, but it's not the jobs that they really, really value. So when it comes time for promotion, right, you're not in the finalists of the people who get promoted. So you should always volunteer for the hard jobs. When they ask for a volunteer for a hard job, you should be the first one to raise your hand. All the lines should form behind you. The organization won't tell you, just from coming in, which jobs those are. Now, you can kind of tell sometimes if you watch how people have been promoted, right? Which jobs they've held. So I'm what's called a senior executive in the Department of Defense. I sit on executive panels where we select the next group of executives. So I know what they're looking for. And so one of the things they're looking for is your background. Have you held the right jobs? If you're going to be chief engineer, have you held the right jobs? Do you have any hands-on experience with the product line? Or are you one of those people who got called up to corporate very early in your career and you have no hands-on experience with the product line? So it's pretty cool to get called up to corporate early. But I will tell you, at some point you're going to plateau because they will never respect you because you have no experience with the product line. They will always test you. Okay. So, having been chief engineer of submarines, right, left that job, went to another job. I'm in a meeting, and someone makes a statement about something. And so I said, sir, that statement's not correct. And he looked at me. He was senior to me. He says, it is correct. I said, sir, no, it isn't. So he looked at me. He says, have you ever been on a submarine? So that was the test, right? You follow me, right? He said, have you ever been on a submarine? I said, yes, sir, I have. Have you ever commanded a submarine? I said, no, sir, I haven't. He said, well, I have. And I'm telling you this doesn't occur. So I said, sir, I says, I was on Alpha Trials. Alpha Trials is the first time they take it to sea. So I said, sir, I was on Alpha Trials at SSN 21, SSN 22, SSN 23, SSN 735, 736, 737, 738, 739, and 740. He rocked back in his chair. I said, so I'm telling you, I've been out to sea, and I've witnessed this, and I know that this occurs. And I know that what you said does not occur. He says, okay, thank you. So that was the test, right? That was the test. It was a room of about 100 people. That was the test. You will most certainly experience that. Count on it. In fact, if you can find me, call me when it happens to you, because I'd love to hear it. Okay? You will most certainly experience it. You have to have some experience with the product line. And I don't care what it is. And if they don't give it to you, you need to ask for it and go do it. Because you move up, and I assume you intend to be a player, not an observer, right? You heard me say that earlier today, some of you, right? You intend to be a player, not an observer. If you want to be an observer, that means that when it gets hard and I ask you to come in the game, you're going to say, no, I want to sit on the bench and watch. Right? I don't want to be responsible in case we lose. If you're a player, coach, put me in. I want to take the winning free throws. And if I miss, tough. But you want to be in the game and you want to be a player because it is the players that we're going to promote. And it's the players that are going to be the next leaders of the organization. And you want to be leaders, right? Just look at Howard graduates. Look at the folks in here. Where's Greg? Greg, right? Is Greg here? Greg leave? So I guess Greg left. So Greg West and I, right? Howard undergrad together. So Jesse McCurdy, who just retired, Chief Engineer in Naval Air Systems Command, first African American senior executive in the Naval Air Systems Command, and he was Chief Engineer over about a $100 billion organization building the nation's aircrafts. F-15s, F-16s, right? Jesse McCurdy, Howard graduate, right? Chief Engineer. And there's a whole list of us out there that are making a difference. Hillary Shelton, Washington Bureau Chief, NAACP. You watch TV enough, you'll see him. Remember this name, Hillary Shelton, right? Howard grad, with me. There's just lots of folks out there. We need engineers. The problems don't stop. There's Greg. So. Greg and I undergrad at Howard together. But we need engineers. And in fact, I've been talking to the Department of Defense, having them come and says, you need to come to HBCUs, right, and recruit at HBCUs. Because what you need, the way you get innovation is through diversity. Right? So I will tell you, right, folks' tendency is to hire people who look like them and think like them. It's just a tendency. That doesn't mean they're bad people, right? It's just a tendency. They will hire people that look like them and think like them, that are kind of from the same part of the country they're from, kind of grew up the way that they grew up. In my business, I will tell you that's dangerous. I don't need people to think like me. I need people who think differently from me. I need folks who have a slightly different perspective on what we're doing. In fact, that's how you solve problems. That's why you have a group project. Right? Because your mate thinks differently than how you think. Right? Your classmate kind of brings a slightly different perspective. So one of my jobs is to make sure that I have a diverse organization. And the way you get diversity of thought is you need diversity of people. And that's why I'm telling them you got to come to HBCUs and recruit. Because right now they're recruiting from same places that they do that are not HBCUs. Which means you need to be available. Right? We want to hire you because you bring a different way of thinking. Now, from your training today, from what I saw, wow, what innovative thinking. And that's what we need. I'm going to leave you with this, and I'm going to tell you why it's so important. So one of my jobs when I was chief engineer of submarines is that I was the final signatory to authorize a submarine to dive after new construction. The last guy that signed it says, you're authorized to dive. 50 years ago last week, we lost USS Thresher. We lost all hands, 124 sailors and 17 civilians. In the North Atlantic, right, we believe we know what happened. It was an engineering failure. I actually met some of the children of the crew members. What we did as a nation, we promised the families of the survivors that we would never let that happen again. We lost 124 Americans. We said we would never let that happen again. Last week was his 50th anniversary. So it turns out that that was my job to ensure that it never happened again. I will tell you, there were a fair number of nights, right? 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm sitting there, and everybody wants to go. They want to go to sea, and I'm the final signatory, and I ask you questions. If I ask you a question and you can't answer it, the process stops. It actually stops. I would slide the book back across the table, and I says, when you can answer my question, you can come back to see me. Doesn't matter what time it is. When you can answer the question, you can come back and see me. Because we're going to maintain the promise that we made to the family members that we would never let it happen again. And it's about engineering. It's about engineering integrity. It's about doing the right thing. Doesn't mean that we don't take risk. We take risk all the time. But when we take risk, we understand what the risk is. So I haven't seen a time yet when you put the engineers in the room, but we couldn't figure it out. Haven't seen one yet. Does it get hard? You betcha. And it's not for the weak of heart. Because every now and then, it's actually an unpleasant conversation. Right? It's an unpleasant conversation. So I'll look you in the eye and ask you, says, are you ready to sign to say that this is the right thing to go do? Okay. It really is about people. Machines, computers, right? Rotating machinery, none of that stuff really does it, right? Right? None of that really does it. It really is about people. It's about trained people. It's about experienced people knowing how to execute their job, right? Having the confidence to say when something is working, and even harder, having the integrity and the confidence to stand up and say no. So that's where it's really hard. When everybody else is saying yes and you know that it's wrong, having the integrity to stand up and say no. 5 times in my career I've done that. Let me tell you, it is very lonely. There's nobody else standing over there with you, right, when you have to say no. And all 5 times I've been right. So we need you because the nation needs you. America's dependent on you. Okay? America's dependent on you. We need what you do. And you will see very soon when you graduate how truthful it is what I'm telling you. Okay? So great job today. Congratulations. And I look forward to seeing you out in the workplace. Thanks.